Hello and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Before we get going, let's take care of a couple of bits of business. If you find our shows helpful, please consider supporting us. Go to podcast.groong.org/donate and become a sustaining member. But that's not the only way you can help. Hundreds of our listeners are listening to our shows through podcasts. If you listen to our show on Apple Podcasts, for example, on your iPhone or iPad or your Mac computers, please rate our show and leave a brief review. More reviews will help us reach more listeners on that platform. Finally, thank you for your comments under our YouTube videos. We appreciate and read all of them, so keep them coming and like and share our shows with your friends. All right, on with the show. We are less than 2 weeks away from the U.S. presidential elections. And across the 50 states, there are thousands of politicians running for office. And for many of the positions which are consequential for our community, the Armenian National Committee of America, the ANCA, puts out endorsements, which are basically recommendations for Armenian-minded voters to consider. We are joined by the executive director of the ANCA, Aram Hamparian. Hello, Aram. Thanks for coming back.
Absolute pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you.
Hello, Aram.
Good to be with you, Hovik.
Wow, Aram, that's a beautiful flag behind you in your office. Where did you get that?
So that was a flag that flew over a warship during the Second World War. My dad served in the Navy during the Second World War, later during the Korea conflict. And at the very tail end of the war, as he was being decommissioned and sent home, he asked the captain of his ship, could he take the flag with him? And the captain agreed. And it's always been like a treasured family heirloom for us. As you can see here, it's a 48-star flag before Alaska and Hawaii joined.
It's huge and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's actually made of wool, and it's really a family treasure, and it means a lot to us. And I think it really speaks to our heritage as Armenians and Americans, and how we've maintained our identity, but also been deeply devoted to our home.
So, Aram, can you tell us a little bit about how you assess or grade elected politicians on Armenian-American issues?
Sure. We actually look at the records of each incumbent across 40 different metrics. What legislation have they supported? What letters have they signed? What visits to the region have they undertaken? Have they engaged with the local community? Are they active, for example, on social media in support of ANCA priorities? We aggregate those 40 different metrics and give them differing degrees of weight. And based upon that score, essentially, we enter into consultations with our regional ANCs, our local ANCs, with our friends who are very close to those legislators, and collectively we assign a grade. And then within the higher graded incumbents, we issue endorsements. So there's a set of politicians who will get A's or A pluses, and there are those who will get the F's and F minuses, a lot in the middle. There's also folks who are challengers or seeking new office. So, for example, we're very excited that Congressman Adam Schiff is running for the Senate. He's moving from the House to the Senate. Almost certainly, with the support of Armenians, will win that contest. And there's a range of other races around the country. I'll identify two Republicans that we're very, very strongly behind. One is David Valadao of Fresno in the Central Valley. A lot of Armenians there. He's been a great friend. He's been to Artsakh. He's one of our great champions. And the other is a new legislator, Mike Lawler, from New York, just in the New York suburbs north of Manhattan. He's been a great champion and is actually leading the effort to enforce restrictions on Azerbaijan. So there's, I think, close to 90 candidates that we've endorsed, and we gave grades to every single politician. We do that, as you said, Asbed, as a public service so that people can see exactly where they stand. And when they enter the voting booth, they can take with them, whatever input that we provide. Obviously, Armenians are well represented across the political spectrum. I think we're a bit like a bell curve, and folks are going to vote how they want to vote, but we just like to make sure that they're informed on Armenian issues.
Aram, when it comes to the presidential race, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have pretty dismal records, if I may say so myself. What's your assessment of both campaigns?
First, let me say that their engagement with our community, I think, stands out. We've seen that in the last couple of days. I think it was just a day or two ago, President Trump spoke out.
Yeah.
And it was about a month ago that Vice President Harris spoke out.
Yeah.
And this is a healthy thing. This is how democracy should work, which is that the candidates chasing the voters, not the voters chasing the candidates. And that's a healthy thing. It is a net positive, regardless of where any particular Armenian stands across the American political spectrum. It's a net positive that these two politicians realize our importance in a very closely contested race and are courting our votes. That's a positive. That being said, Hovik, we have a long history of presidential promises and essentially uniformly broken once in office. We are mature enough as a community to understand the dynamics of campaigns and the dynamics of governing, and they're almost like two different creatures. But let's also remember that these types of promises do create a benchmark against which we can judge whoever gets elected. And also, in a way, they create the canon of either Democratic or Republican thought. So moving forward, other politicians in the Democratic and Republican lanes, respectively, including in Congress, will kind of like see that, okay, the head of my party just slammed Azerbaijan for the ethnic cleansing and is exacting a political cost on the incumbent administration. And on the other side, we see the vice president speaking out for the return of Armenians to Artsakh, which is a major, major policy priority of ours. And the fact that they're not necessarily, that is not going to translate one-to-one to policy is well known to us. But the fact that they are framing the American discourse on these issues through the campaign process, that is how our democracy is supposed to work. We do this with our eyes wide open, but not with so much cynicism that we discount everything that's said. There's considerable value in engaging in the electoral process. And the evidence of that is that they are coming to us for our votes. Yeah. Going back to your initial point, neither has come close to earning our endorsement. To be clear, both armed Azerbaijan knowingly. Azerbaijan made no secret of its agenda, of its genocidal intentions. They armed Azerbaijan. They enabled a genocide starting in 2020, ending in 2023, and they abandoned Artsakh, each in their own way, horrifically. Like the most at-risk people on the planet, utterly abandoned by both candidates, and neither has in any way renounced or reversed or rolled back, walked back those positions. So yeah, they don't come close to an ANC endorsement. We've left the door open by saying if there's something you can deliver before the election, then we'll take a look at it. And that's a much better model than saying, promise, tell us what you'll do after the election. And then, after the election, your phone calls are, go unanswered. But for example, President Trump is a Republican. He could get on the phone publicly or privately, actually, ideally publicly, call on Speaker Johnson. Let's get a vote on HR 7288, which would enforce Section 907. Senator Vance, who's a sitting member of the U.S. Senate, could co-sponsor and work for the passage of SRES 540, which would scrutinize Azerbaijan's use of U.S. military aid to commit war crimes against Armenians. On the Democratic side, the vice president could announce that the administration is formally enforcing 907, ramping up U.S. aid for Artsakh refugees, and announcing that we will not send a single representative to the COP conference until every last Armenian hostage is released. So that's on the table. And if they're willing to take those steps, we'd be willing to consider an endorsement. But with every passing day, that bar gets higher and higher, for example, because the Congress is out of session, right? And all we can get is a promise for future action when the Congress returns to the lame duck session. And we all know what promises are worth.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, with I believe less than 2 weeks away, do you see any likelihood that there will be some movement from either candidate towards Armenian issues in the... I mean, we saw the letters, we'll go into those, but barring any major news from either campaigns, what is the ANCA's guidance on how people should vote?
That's a very good question. We would start by saying support pro-Armenian congressional candidates. That's the best thing we can do this cycle. That being said, we cannot encourage votes for either Trump or Harris. As I said, they armed Azerbaijan. They enabled genocide. They abandoned Artsakh. Those are, at least by my lights, unforgivable sins. They're unforgivable sins. And there's been zero repentance, zero renunciation. So we can't put our name behind either candidate, nor can we encourage Armenian Americans to vote for either candidate. They might decide to, based on other considerations, to cast a vote on the Democratic or Republican ticket. They might decide to vote for a third-party candidate. But we have no recommendation in this race. And that's sad, but it sort of lays out for us the work that lays ahead, which is to work over the next 4 years, legislatively, but also nationally, to make it such that we do not have an incumbent or a challenger next cycle who has such a terrible record.
Speaking of third-party candidates, I was trying very hard to see if the Stein campaign had any statements about Armenia or anything related to our issues. Can you talk a little bit about that campaign as well? And why not a third party just out of protest?
I don't think, first of all, that we would need to see that their record, the record of the third-party candidate, merited an endorsement, and we have not seen that. The only third-party candidate for a time was RFK Jr., who had a strong, at least rhetorical record on Armenian issues, and actually quite a history on Armenian issues. But I don't think we'll endorse Stein, who, as far as I could tell, has no record. I think we reached out early in the campaign, never heard back. No, I think our position ultimately, seems almost certain now, will be a non-endorsement and no third-party endorsement.
All right, well, let's go into the letters. So in the past weeks or month, both Harris and Trump campaigns apparently made moves and made statements that concern Armenians. On September 21st, Harris sent a letter on the occasion of the Armenian Independence Day and affirmed, for whatever that's worth, in her letter, the text Armenian genocide, stated her support for lasting peace, again, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And she wrote, I'm quoting, "The right for Armenians displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh to return safely to their homes." So that's from the Harris campaign. And 2 days ago, Trump slammed Harris for doing nothing while in office during the ethnic cleansing of Christian Armenians. He said, "When I'm president, I will protect persecuted Christians. I will work to stop the violence and ethnic cleansing, and we will work to restore peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan." He actually used the word Artsakh, but I mean, Artsakh is depopulated right now. It's barren. It's ethnically cleansed, and both candidates are talking about peace, something that we know that Armenia is currently undergoing forced capitulation, and to me, that is no peace. So, what are your thoughts on how these two campaigns are approaching the elections? Isn't this just a little too late?
Yeah, certainly is. And certainly, they fall far short of anything that would approach an ANCA endorsement. Just a sideline here, Hovik. I've learned to put air quotes around anytime people use the word peace or democracy. I use air quotes, especially as those two words are deployed here in Washington. They very often mean the exact opposite. If Azerbaijan is seeking to enforce terms on Armenia at the barrel of a gun, right, with a gun to Armenia's head, that's defined as peace. And if Armenians are forced to accept Azerbaijani occupation of its territory, that's peace. And if we're asked to surrender to Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing or to accept Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, that's peace. And the group in Armenia that does that is automatically defined as democratic. So,
yeah,
Washington lies. This is something I think that it takes you have to have a couple of gray hairs, I think, to kind of understand this. But almost everything that's said in Washington about Armenian issues, I'll just speak about Armenian issues, is either a lie or profoundly misleading. So just accept that as the basis of the discussion. And this is going to bring me to a point which I really want to raise here.
Well, at least they didn't finish their letters with "May the Armenians rest in peace."
Yeah.
Sorry for the dark joke.
Okay, let me say something here. We decided a year or more ago that we would work this election from the grassroots up. Now, another approach, and it's very common in DC, is to play the inside game. And the analogy I'll use is like medieval court politics, where every candidate has their advisors and their minions, and everyone is seeking some kind of access and advantage to get higher on the pyramid so that they can have some clout that they can then deploy later when the person gets elected or whatever. Like, there's the court politics inside game where you depend on your access and your influence and the strength of your arguments and the moral nature of your appeal. There's that approach, right? Which is like kind of to chase the politician. And the other approach, and I think it was one that we adopt, is to build a grassroots base to hold these guys accountable and to tell them, you have really acted against our community. You have crossed our community. You have crossed an Armenian electorate in America that has been here now 130, 140 years, is deeply rooted in the American soil, but also in our political system. And we exist as important voting groups in Michigan and Pennsylvania and the other states I mentioned. And we are not happy about this. You have crossed us, and crossing us comes with a cost. That cost will be paid in votes. We will exact that cost because of how we were crossed. And now the problem is not how does a group like the ANC curry favor with some particular advisor who's posturing as, the key to the kingdom, right? Instead, it's the problem then becomes the problem of the campaigns. How do you address a group of rightfully outraged Armenian voters who did not appreciate having their tax dollars genocide their countrymen back home? That is the approach that we've adopted, and we've seen the results of it. That's the way the game should be played. We have at times ruffled some feathers. There are dear friends of ours who are maybe not as hardened to this stuff as I have become, who are, it's beyond their comfort zone to challenge an incumbent administration or to challenge the challengers in this case, who are seeking the office in such an assertive way. But I'm entirely comfortable with that. I don't think we have a second-class citizenship. I don't think our passport has some kind of stamp on it that identifies us as less entitled to bring our issues to the table of American democracy. So we've been very aggressive about it, very aggressive about it. It's out of the comfort zone of some of our dear friends, but that is how the game is played. DC is not about people doing favors for people. It is not about people feeling sorry for the Armenians or feeling some kind of compassion. It's about their interests, and we have to play the interest game. And if they see there's a cost to crossing the Armenians, they will adjust going forward. And that's
Aram, how did the word Artsakh enter Trump's statement? I mean, up until maybe a couple of weeks ago, we didn't know that Donald Trump even knew that Armenian-Americans existed. And now he doesn't just say Nagorno-Karabakh like Kamala Harris said in her statement, but now he says Artsakh. Do you have any idea how he decided to use that terminology?
There's multiple vectors here, and let me say a couple of things. A little bit of asymmetry, Democratic-Republican asymmetry, and this might answer the question or it might not. The asymmetry is something like, on the Democratic side, we are blessed with Democratic legislators who are the core of our support on Capitol Hill. In any given legislative measure or letter or event, or you name the measure, the Democrats have been very supportive on Capitol Hill on Armenian issues. Outside of Capitol Hill, we don't have quite as many kind of like leading lights or big influencers who are very vocal on the Armenian issue. It may be because they're kind of following the administration's lead or the State Department's lead. I'm not exactly sure. People can figure that out for themselves. Whereas on the Republican side, there are a number of influencers who are vocally pro-Armenian. And I'll just name names that are, I think, familiar to your listeners. Hovik Manucharyan, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. J.D. Vance, in his own way, has expressed some sympathy and understanding of the Armenian plight in ways that other people at that level have not. So it's a bit of an asymmetry. And I would say that some combination of those and others were able to craft that statement. That being said, I want to give full credit to Vice President Harris for her mention of return. She did not use the word Artsakh, but she did endorse the idea of return. And that needs to be translated into reality. But actions start with words. And good for her for prioritizing the return of Armenians to Artsakh.
Well, I want to dig a little bit deeper into something you said a little earlier, that there will be no endorsement this time because the ANCA doesn't feel like they can put their endorsement, their name behind any of these two candidates. But in that vacuum of recommendation, we also have earlier this year when Arab Americans initiated national Uncommitted movement, if you recall, to tell the Biden and now the Harris campaigns that their support is not a sure thing. And this was during the Democratic primaries, but I believe that at this point in time in the general elections, they have decided to recommend either not to vote for either candidate or possibly even coalesce around Jill Stein as a protest vote, basically. So, knowing that you've told us even in the previous show that there are almost 2 million Armenians in America, if a third of these people are registered and voting, that's 600,000 or 700,000 votes across America.
Yep.
We have obviously some strongholds. California, you mentioned Michigan, Pennsylvania, DC. So what's preventing Armenian Americans from coalescing around the national consensus to vote for a candidate or not to vote for a candidate to have a unique direction which can affect the outcome of these elections? Because without a recommendation, it's going to be very diffuse.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You raise a good point. I just don't think there's I don't think we don't see a third party candidate that merits our support, and we take our support very seriously, which Asbed brings me to like maybe a conceptual point, which will help lead to an answer to your question. Politicians will take us as a community no more seriously than we take ourselves. Okay, that's, I think, a very, very important principle. That not everyone sees things that way, right? There are other ethnic groups, and there are even some of our dear Armenian-American brothers and sisters who are comfortable lowering the bar to the level acceptable to their preference, right? So they might, if you can imagine, again, a bell curve of Armenians, and there's going to be some never Trumpers and never Harris people, and in their mind, they might say something like, the Armenian issue is not important enough for me to weigh as I go to vote. That's just how some people think. Other people will say, on balance, I'm going to vote for my preferred candidate. And even if they were at this level, I can lower my expectation down to that level so I can justify my support for that person. And we're going to have some of that. But I think increasingly, we're going to see a lot of people who just can't vote for either party. And we have daily contact with our Arab friends. And again, they would fall along their own bell curve with some who primarily for non-foreign policy, usually social or more traditional reasons, will go Trump. I don't think there's a huge Arab population that thinks that Trump's foreign policy is attractive. At the same time, there's others who are just longtime Dems and they're going to vote Harris. But I think that the partisans in each camp are representing sort of diminishing commodities, and there's a larger group in the middle. So the thought might be something like this. An Arab American going to vote would think, well, the larger equities here are such that I need to support the left or the right. That might be one way to think about it. I think a lot of Arab Americans today, and these are the people we talk to all the time, are like, you know what? If somebody is complicit in the genocide of our people, then that falls in the category of unforgivable sin. We're not going to give our votes to that person. And then the counter to that appeal is, well, what about Trump, or what about Harris, or what about this and that? And the answer is, well, if you were worried about our votes, maybe you should have thought of that before you did all these policies that are so incredibly destructive to our people. And that's your problem now, not my problem. The idea that the Supreme Court or any vital American issue is at stake, becomes a bit secondary when there's a genocide taking place. And I think that a lot of Armenians feel the same way, which is like, yeah, we're Americans and we care about all the issues like taxes and education and the environment, this and that. But we went through the loss of yet more of our Armenian homeland, the deaths of many young boys, young men, slaughtered by an Azerbaijani government that was armed by our government with our tax dollars. And I think it's fair for us to say there's got to be a cost for that. And frankly, you know what? The rest of the electorate, the rest of the population, all the other issues, people can work on those issues. This is at the top of my mind when I enter the ballot box. So I get the sense that that's kind of where the Armenian community is heading. It's harder to quantify. I agree. If RFK had stayed in the race as an independent, perhaps that would have been an option. But this is where we are, Asbed.
Aram, you said that there needs to be a cost to the candidates, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. The Arab Americans are guiding that they should not vote either for Harris or Trump. Some are recommending to vote for Jill Stein. So now the Harris campaign is scrambling to attack Jill Stein's campaign, even though she has no chance to get elected. And that looks to me like the Arab Americans are forcing a campaign cost on Harris because she sees that votes are being drained from her side, right? So I want to see the same thing for Armenian Americans. If Vice President Harris just stood by and watched the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, I don't want to hear that Trump would be worse for us. Let's make sure she doesn't get elected, or at least she doesn't get our votes. And next time around, the Democrats can think twice about failing to meet Armenian American interests and, losing 600,000 or 700,000 votes. Otherwise, we're just getting used.
Well, let's see how this plays out. So let's say, for example, the vote in Pennsylvania comes down to 20,000 votes.
Or Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan.
Yeah.
Michigan, I think, is must win. Maybe Pennsylvania is
absolutely.
So let's say one party or the other is defeated by X number of votes, and that number of votes is, let's say, around the number of Armenians in the state, we could very credibly share that, the outcome might have been different had candidate A or candidate B not been complicit in the genocide of Artsakh. And again, like our friends, Armenian friends on the left and right will not be comfortable with that approach because their North Star might be the movement of America toward the left or the right. That might be their North Star issue, and perfectly understandable. But we're not serving our constituency. We're certainly not helping make Armenia more secure if we defer to those sort of non-Armenian considerations. Like, I think we're very comfortable at this time, given all that's happened, given the culpability of the two candidates. We're very comfortable saying that neither deserve our support. Let's see if either of them is certainly the one who loses takes a lesson from that. For example, I'll give on the Arab community. Let's say that Harris loses, and she loses Michigan, and as a result of losing Michigan, loses the race. Might that cause her and her party to rethink the foreign policy that contributed to that loss, right? And that's an example, and I'm going to go into a little bit of theory here. That's an example of how democracy influences foreign policy, which is the exception. U.S. foreign policy, in fact, almost in every country, foreign policy is the province of a very narrow segment of the population. It has aristocratic roots in which the sovereign had a set of advisors, and the idea that some outsider could tell them what to do was, considered insane. And it's like this highly insulated segment of American governance that from time to time, because we have elections, has to be revisited, right? And we would like this election to be an opportunity for American policymakers to understand that there are costs. So, like, I'll give my take on the Biden-Harris foreign policy. As far as I can tell, if you judge people by the effect of their actions, not their intentions, right? The impact of what they do, not their intentions. It would seem to me that the people running the Biden-Harris foreign policy are interested in seeing the Biden, or rather in this case, the Harris ticket lose. Because every single thing they have done has been to outrage voters, to outrage the grassroots. I can tell you that there's very few steps that Biden and Harris have taken that are not deeply offensive to Armenians. They could not call the blockade of Artsakh a crisis. Under questioning before the U.S. Congress, Samantha Power, the head of USAID, resisted strenuously, mightily, the designation of crisis. Couldn't use the word crisis for a group of 120,000 Armenians starved for 10 months, right? The aid they sent before the blockade was zero, right? There was some minor demining assistance, but no humanitarian programs run during that entire time before the blockade. Nothing done to lift the blockade, certainly no airlift. Add to that the waiving of 907 within hours of the recognition of the Armenian genocide. Like, these are things that it's almost like, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, they think this is good for America. I think it's wrong for America, but this is what they did. But the net effect politically is something like you just are pouring salt, rubbing salt into Armenian wounds on a weekly basis, sending out a message. The good thing about our democracy, as imperfect as it is that there's an opportunity to push back and to stand up against that kind of arrogance and indifference.
Yeah. So to all the things that you said, I just want to add also that we've heard from our guests who have been at conferences, and they have been asked by State Department agents how the Armenian diaspora would react to the wholesale displacement of Artsakh Armenians. And this is in February of 2023. So not only was there complete passive stance on the part of the United States, I think they knew about it. I think they also aided and abetted that happening.
Again, judge people not by their words, because they're almost always lying, especially in this city, but by the effect of their action. And the one argument is they lost no sleep over the loss of Artsakh. No, they engineered it. As this history is written, it's going to be something like, how do we create the pretense of concern while enabling Azerbaijan to do what it will?
So a week and a half to go. How do we achieve solidarity and unity around our issues?
Okay, I think we're always going to have our partisans, and they're some of the most powerful voices in our community. The Armenians who are deeply devoted to the Democrats and deeply devoted to the Republicans. They're good friends, and they bring a lot of value to the Armenian table. But I think what we're seeing increasingly is a group of Armenians who are, in a sense, post-partisan and who see what's happened to the Armenians and are not happy about it and are eager to send a message to Washington that you do this stuff at your own peril. You attack the Armenians, you cross the Armenians at your own risk. And I think that's a healthy thing. It's good for us as Armenians, it's good for us as Americans. And it's as I said at the start, it's how our democracy is supposed to work.
All right. Well, good luck to us. May democracy win. Let's leave it there for today, Aram.
Thank you
And
so much. Thank you, Asbed.
Thank you, Aram.
and hopefully we'll touch base sometime in November and see how things went in retrospect.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on October 25, 2024. We've been talking with Mr. Aram Suren Hamparian, who is the executive director of the ANCA, the Armenian National Committee of America in Washington, D.C. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.